Most people were taught a simple idea about results. If you want more, you have to push harder, work longer, compete more aggressively. Pay closer attention to what everyone else is doing and make sure you're not falling behind. This belief is so common that it rarely gets questioned. It feels responsible, logical, even mature. And yet for many people, it quietly leads to the same place. More effort, but not more peace. More motion, but not more stability. More information, but less clarity. You may recognize this feeling. On the outside, you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're learning, improving, staying busy, trying to be disciplined. But underneath all of that, there's a subtle tension. A sense that no matter how much you adjust on the surface, something deeper isn't lining up. The results feel fragile, temporary, dependent on constant attention and force. This audiobook begins with a different premise. What if results were never meant to be chased? What if the struggle to keep up was not a sign of ambition, but a sign of misalignment? Imagine a river for a moment. When water is forced uphill, it requires enormous energy, constant pressure, and relentless effort. The moment that pressure stops, the movement collapses. But when water flows downhill, aligned with gravity, it doesn't need motivation. It doesn't need discipline. It moves naturally, steadily, and over time it reshapes entire landscapes. Human effort works the same way. When your attention is scattered outward, toward comparison, reaction, and constant adjustment, you may create movement, but you rarely create compounding. The energy leaks. Decisions feel rushed. Progress feels noisy. You're always responding, rarely choosing. There is another way of operating that most people are never taught. It starts by turning inward. Not in a selfish way, not by ignoring the world, but by anchoring your decisions to something more stable than external signals. When you focus inward, you begin to act from clarity instead of urgency, from identity instead of pressure, from coherence instead of reaction. This is where results begin to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but quietly, consistently, and with a sense of inevitability that doesn't require constant effort to maintain. Opportunities feel less chaotic. Choices feel cleaner. You stop forcing outcomes and start noticing that things move when you're no longer pushing against yourself. This is not motivation. This is not positive thinking. And this is not about working less or wanting less. It is about understanding a simple but powerful law. Results respond to coherence, not force. When your inner state is aligned, when your values, decisions, and direction point the same way, external outcomes have very little choice but to follow. Throughout this audiobook, we won't talk about shortcuts, tactics, or quick wins. We won't give you formulas to copy or steps to chase. Instead, we'll explore the inner conditions that make sustainable results unavoidable. The kind of results that don't collapse the moment your attention shifts elsewhere. If you've ever felt that you were doing everything right, but still sensed something was off, this is for you. If you're tired of reacting, comparing, and adjusting without ever feeling settled, this is for you. And if you're ready to understand why calm, focused people often go further with less visible effort, you're in the right place. When you focus inward, you stop chasing outcomes. And when you stop chasing, results don't disappear. They become inevitable. Chapter 1. Why trying harder rarely creates better results. Most people were taught to believe that effort is the universal solution. If something isn't working, the answer must be to try harder. Put in more hours. Apply more pressure, push through resistance, and expect results to eventually comply. This belief feels responsible and mature, which is why it's rarely questioned. It sounds like discipline, it sounds like strength, but over time, this logic begins to crack. You can see it in people who are constantly busy, yet strangely stuck. They do more, learn more, optimize more, and still feel as if progress slips through their fingers. Their days are full, but their direction feels unclear. Their effort increases, yet their results remain inconsistent. Something about the equation no longer adds up. The problem is not laziness, and it is not a lack of intelligence. The problem is that effort, by itself, is a blunt instrument. Trying harder often amplifies whatever state you're already operating from. If that state is clear and aligned, effort can help. But if that state is confused, reactive, or tense, more effort simply deepens the misalignment. You don't fix a crooked compass by walking faster. You just get lost more quickly. This is where many people quietly burn out. They assume the discomfort they feel is a sign that they're close to a breakthrough. So they push. They override their instincts. They ignore the subtle signals telling them something is off. And in doing so, they mistake exhaustion for progress. The world praises this behavior. It calls it grit, hustle, commitment. But the body and mind keep their own records. An effort applied without clarity creates friction. Friction creates noise, and noise makes it almost impossible to see what actually matters. Decisions become reactive instead of intentional. Priorities blur. You spend more time responding than choosing. And slowly, without realizing it, you trade effectiveness for activity. There is a quiet irony here. The people who appear to be trying less are often the ones moving further. They are not necessarily smarter or luckier. They simply understand something most people never stop to examine. Results do not scale linearly with effort. Past a certain point, more force produces diminishing returns. Sometimes it produces the opposite of what you want. Think of a clenched fist. The harder you squeeze, the tighter it becomes. But nothing new enters it. To receive anything, the hand must open. Effort clenches. Clarity opens. When you rely solely on trying harder, you lock yourself into a narrow range of options. You become overly attached to specific outcomes and blind to better paths that don't require force. You stop listening. You stop adjusting intelligently. You keep pushing in the same direction because stopping feels like failure. This is why effort-based thinking often creates short-term wins and long-term instability. You may get a result through sheer force, but it rarely lasts. It demands constant maintenance. The moment your attention slips or your energy dips, the structure collapses. There is no compounding, no margin, no sense of inevitability. Trying harder is noisy. It floods your system with urgency. Urgency feels productive, but it is usually a sign of internal disagreement. One part of you wants safety. Another wants growth. Another wants approval. When these signals compete, effort becomes chaotic. You move, but not cleanly. Fast, but not smoothly. And smooth systems always outperform strained ones. This is not an argument against effort. It is an argument against effort without alignment. When effort comes from clarity, it feels different. It is focused, selective, and calm. It doesn't try to solve everything at once. It knows what to ignore. But most people never reach that state because they never stop trying long enough to notice they are misaligned. They confuse motion with momentum. They confuse pressure with progress. And because trying harder is socially rewarded, they keep going even when the returns quietly vanish. There is a deeper question hidden underneath all of this. What if better results don't come from doing more, but from doing less? More precisely? What if the key variable isn't effort, but the quality of the state effort comes from? This chapter is not meant to discourage you. It's meant to relieve you. If you've been pushing and still feel unstable, it doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you've been taught an incomplete rule. You are told effort creates results, but not that effort must be guided by coherence to be effective. When effort is misdirected, Trying harder rarely helps. It simply makes the misdirection louder. In the chapters ahead, we'll begin to examine what actually creates stability beneath results, and why the shift that matters most has very little to do with force. Once you see this clearly, effort stops feeling like a struggle, and results stop feeling accidental. Chapter 2. The Trap of Living in Constant Reaction. There is a subtle shift that happens when effort becomes a habit rather than a choice. You stop deciding your direction and start responding to whatever appears in front of you. Messages, opinions, market movements, expectations, trends, all of them quietly pull at your attention. Without realizing it, your life begins to operate in reaction mode. Reaction mode feels active, busy, responsible, but it is one of the most unstable ways to live. When you are reacting, your actions are dictated by external signals instead of internal clarity. You move because something moved first. You decide because something demanded a response. Over time, this creates a sense that you are always behind, always adjusting, always catching up to a world that never slows down. The trap is that reaction feels necessary. You tell yourself that staying alert keeps you safe, that watching others helps you stay informed. That response quickly proves competence, and on the surface, this logic seems sound. But beneath it, something important erodes: your ability to choose deliberately. Reaction replaces selection. Instead of asking, "Is this worth my energy?" you ask, "How do I respond to this?" Instead of shaping your path, you adapt to whatever crosses it. And the more often you do this, the harder it becomes to tell what actually matters to you versus what simply grabbed your attention. This is how noise enters your life. Noise is not just sound or distraction. Noise is anything that pulls you away from your own signal. When you live in reaction, noise multiplies. Every comparison becomes a potential threat. Every success you see elsewhere becomes a silent question about your own progress. Every shift in circumstances demands a recalibration, and recalibration never ends. The cost of this mode of living is not immediately obvious. At first, you feel engaged, stimulated, connected. But over time, a quiet tension builds. You begin to feel scattered, pulled in multiple directions, busy without a sense of depth. Your actions multiply, but your confidence does not. Reaction mode drains energy because it keeps you externally oriented. Your nervous system stays alert, scanning for cues. Your mind stays busy, interpreting signals. There is no rest because rest requires trust, and reaction mode is built on vigilance. This is why so many capable people feel perpetually tired even when they are doing the right things. They are not exhausted from work. They are exhausted from constant adjustment. When you react, you surrender timing. You move when others move. You decide when circumstances force you to. And because you are always responding, you rarely feel ahead. Even success feels temporary because it must be defended and repeated under new conditions. This is the opposite of compounding. Compounding requires consistency. Consistency requires stability. And stability cannot exist in a state of constant reaction. Each response resets the system. Each adjustment fragments focus. Instead of building momentum, you keep restarting. There is also a deeper psychological cost. Living in reaction subtly trains you to distrust yourself. You begin to believe that answers exist outside of you, that safety comes from monitoring others, that clarity must be borrowed rather than cultivated. Over time, your own instincts feel quieter, less reliable, drowned out by the volume of external input. This is not because your instincts disappeared, it is because you stopped listening long enough to hear them. Reaction mode turns life into a series of interruptions. You never fully arrive anywhere because you are always half-turned toward the next signal. Decisions are made quickly, but rarely cleanly. You move, but without conviction. And movement without conviction rarely produces lasting results. Contrast this with a different way of operating. When someone acts from intention rather than reaction, their energy changes. They are not faster, but they are steadier. They do not respond to everything, only to what aligns. They do not chase every signal because they know where they are going. Their actions may look quieter, but they carry more weight. This is because intention filters noise. Instead of asking, "What is happening?" they ask, "What matters?" Instead of reacting to urgency, they move according to priority. Over time, this creates a sense of control that does not come from force, but from alignment. Reaction scatters. Intention concentrates. Most people never experience this difference because reaction is rewarded early in life. Quick responses are praised. Adaptability is celebrated. Stillness is misunderstood. But there comes a point where the skills that once helped you survive begin to limit your ability to build. What worked in chaos does not work in construction. This chapter is not asking you to withdraw from the world. It is asking you to notice how often you are being pulled instead of choosing. How many of your decisions are shaped by comparison, urgency, or fear of missing out. And how little space is left for clarity when reaction becomes your default state. The moment you see this clearly, something changes. You realize that not every signal deserves a response. Not every movement requires adjustment. Not every opportunity is aligned. And in that realization, a new kind of calm begins to form. Reaction creates motion, but only intention creates direction. In the next chapter, we'll look at the invisible costs that accumulate when reaction becomes a lifestyle, and why so many people feel stuck without understanding why. Chapter 3. The invisible cost. Nobody talks about. There are costs that show up clearly on paper, and then there are costs that quietly accumulate in the background. Most people are trained to notice the obvious ones: money spent, hours worked, opportunities missed. But the most damaging costs are rarely visible. They don't announce themselves. They don't appear as failures. They show up as a slow erosion of clarity, confidence, and internal stability. This is the invisible cost of living misaligned. When your life is driven by effort and reaction, the losses don't arrive all at once. They leak out gradually. A little more tension each year, a little less certainty in your decisions. A growing sense that you are doing a lot, yet somehow not building something that feels solid underneath you. At first, this is easy to ignore. You tell yourself it's just a phase. That once you reach the next milestone, things will settle. That once you have more money, more freedom, or more validation, the pressure will ease. But milestones come and go, and the pressure often remains. Sometimes it even increases, because now there is more to protect. What you're paying for, without realizing it, is internal instability. When your actions are guided by external signals, your inner world never quite settles. There is always something to monitor, something to respond to, something to adjust. This constant vigilance creates a low-grade stress that becomes your baseline. You may not feel anxious in a dramatic way, but you rarely feel grounded either. And over time, this takes a toll. The first thing to go is patience. When your system is under constant pressure, waiting feels uncomfortable. You want results sooner, not because you're greedy, but because relief feels tied to outcomes. This impatience subtly pushes you toward short-term decisions. You choose what works now over what works sustainably. Then clarity begins to fade. Clarity requires space. It needs quiet. It needs moments where nothing is demanding a response. But reaction-based living fills every gap. Your mind stays occupied, even in rest. You think about what you should be doing, what you might be missing, what others are doing differently. Decisions become harder, not because options are limited, but because everything feels equally urgent. Eventually, confidence is affected. When you are always adjusting to external cues, you start to doubt your own judgment. You look outward for confirmation. You second-guess choices that once felt right. You hesitate, then compensate by pushing harder. This creates a loop where uncertainty fuels effort, and effort fuels more uncertainty. The invisible cost is not that you fail, it's that you never feel settled in your success. Even when things go well, there is an underlying tension, a sense that it could slip away if you stop paying attention. You enjoy the result, but you don't trust it. And because you don't trust it, you keep working to hold it in place. This is exhausting in a way that rest doesn't fix. Another cost that rarely gets named is fragmentation. When your focus is pulled in many directions, your energy spreads thin. You may touch many things, but you don't go deep with any of them. Depth requires commitment, and commitment requires confidence that you are on the right path. Without that confidence, you hedge. You keep options open. You stay flexible. Flexibility is useful in chaos. It is harmful in construction. Building anything that compounds, wealth, skill, reputation, or peace, requires staying with one direction long enough for momentum to form. Reaction interrupts this process. Each new signal pulls you slightly off course. Over time, you drift far from where you intended to go, without ever making a clear decision to change direction. The invisible cost is paid in lost compounding. Years pass, and while you've been busy, someone else has been consistent. Not more talented, not more informed, just more aligned. They made fewer moves, but each move built on the last. Their progress looks smooth in hindsight, but it was built quietly, without constant adjustment. This comparison often stings, but it reveals something important. The difference was not effort, it was stability. Stability allows decisions to stack. It allows habits to deepen. It allows trust to form between you and your own judgment. Without stability, every choice feels temporary, and temporary choices rarely produce lasting results. There is also an emotional cost. Living without internal alignment creates a sense of being perpetually on. You may relax physically, but mentally you stay alert. You feel responsible for holding everything together. This state slowly dulls joy, not because life is bad, but because presence is fragmented. You are rarely fully where you are. This is why some people look successful, but feel strangely disconnected from their own lives. They have outcomes, but not ownership. They achieved results, but not peace. The tragedy is that none of this feels dramatic enough to demand change. There is no clear breaking point, just a quiet realization, often much later, that you've been carrying more than you needed to. That the struggle was not proof of importance, but a sign of misalignment. Seeing this clearly is the beginning of a shift. When you understand the invisible costs, you stop glorifying constant effort. You stop mistaking tension for progress. You begin to value states that feel calm, grounded, and internally consistent. Not because they are comfortable, but because they are efficient. The absence of noise becomes productive. The absence of urgency becomes powerful. In the next chapter, we'll uncover the underlying law that explains why alignment creates stability, and why stability is the foundation of all sustainable results. Chapter 4. The law behind all sustainable results. There is a reason some results last, while others disappear the moment attention shifts. It has nothing to do with luck, intelligence, or how hard someone is willing to work. Beneath all visible outcomes, there is a quieter force at play, one that operates whether you acknowledge it or not. Most people never see it because they are taught to focus on actions, not conditions. We are trained to ask, "What should I do?" Rarely do we ask, "From what state am I acting?" This is where the law begins. Sustainable results do not respond to pressure. They respond to coherence. When your inner state is aligned, when your intentions, decisions, and direction point the same way, results form naturally around that alignment. When they are not, no amount of effort can stabilize what you create. This is not philosophy, it is not motivation, it is a law. Think about how systems behave in the natural world. A structure stands not because force is constantly applied to hold it up, but because its components support one another. Remove that internal balance, and the structure may stand for a while under tension, but eventually it collapses. The same principle governs human results. Pressure can create movement. Only coherence creates stability. Most people live as if pressure is the primary driver of progress. They push themselves through resistance, override discomfort, and force outcomes into existence. Sometimes this works in the short term, but because the system underneath is unstable, the result demands constant maintenance. Attention cannot drift, energy cannot dip. One missed step, and everything starts to slide. This is why force-based success feels fragile. Coherence works differently. When your inner signals agree with one another, your actions become clean. Decisions require less deliberation. Energy stops leaking into internal conflict. You are no longer pulling yourself in opposite directions. The result is not intensity, but precision, and precision compounds. The law is simple. Results mirror the state that created them. If the state is conflicted, the result will be unstable. If the state is clear, the result will tend to stabilize and grow. You don't have to believe this for it to operate. You only have to observe it. Look back at moments in your life when things flowed. You weren't forcing every step. You weren't second-guessing constantly. You knew what mattered and what didn't. The action felt natural, not strained. Progress felt steady, not dramatic. That was coherence at work. Now contrast that with moments of struggle. You were busy, reactive, trying to fix everything at once. Decisions felt heavy. Results felt temporary. That was incoherence. The system was fighting itself. Most people misinterpret these experiences. They assume the flowing periods were luck and the struggling periods were a lack of effort. So they respond to difficulty by pushing harder, when what's actually missing is alignment. This is where the law becomes counterintuitive. Trying harder from a misaligned state does not fix the problem. It magnifies it. Effort accelerates whatever pattern already exists. If the foundation is unstable, speed only increases the damage. This is why sustainable builders appear calm. They are not calmer because they are indifferent. They are calmer because their internal signals are aligned. They know what they are building. They know what they are willing to ignore. Their energy is not scattered across competing priorities. Coherence simplifies choice. When you are aligned, many decisions disappear. Not because they are resolved intellectually, but because they no longer feel relevant. Noise fades. Urgency loses its grip. You stop reacting to every signal because your internal signal is stronger. This is the hidden advantage most people never learn to cultivate. Instead, they try to manage complexity with effort. More systems, more strategies, more information. But complexity cannot be controlled by force. It can only be reduced through clarity. The law does not reward exhaustion. It rewards consistency. And consistency is not a personality trait. It is a byproduct of coherence. When your inner state is stable, repeating the right actions feels natural. When it is unstable, repetition feels draining. This is why two people can perform the same actions with very different results. One is aligned. The other is compensating. One builds quietly. The other constantly repairs. Once you see this law, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice how often you are acting from tension rather than intention. How many decisions are driven by urgency rather than direction. And how much effort is being used to hold together things that were never built on a stable foundation. This realization is not meant to create guilt. It is meant to create relief. If results have felt fragile, it doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you've been operating from a state that required constant force. The solution is not more discipline. It is deeper coherence. When coherence becomes the priority, results change their behavior. They stop needing to be chased. They stop requiring constant supervision. They begin to organize themselves around your direction. This is how inevitability is created. Not through intensity, not through pressure, but through alignment that makes outcomes unavoidable. In the next chapter, we'll explore what it actually means to focus inward in practical terms, and why this shift feels subtle at first, but changes everything over time. Chapter 5. What it really means to focus inward. When people first hear the phrase, focus inward, they often misunderstand it. It sounds passive, even self-indulgent, as if turning inward means withdrawing from responsibility or ignoring reality. Because of this misunderstanding, many dismiss the idea before they ever explore it. But focusing inward has nothing to do with doing less in the world. It has everything to do with where your actions come from. Most people live with their attention pointed outward by default. They monitor reactions, outcomes, and opinions. They scan for feedback before they decide how to move. Over time, this outward orientation becomes automatic. You act based on what is happening around you, not on what is stable within you. Focusing inward reverses that order. It means decisions originate from clarity, not from pressure. It means your internal signal guides your actions instead of external noise steering them. This shift is subtle, but its effects are profound. To focus inward is to develop an internal reference point. When you have an internal reference point, you no longer need constant validation to move forward. You don't require agreement from everyone. You don't need to react to every signal. You act because something aligns, not because something demands a response. This is not stubbornness. It is coherence. Most people confuse focus with intensity. They believe focusing inward means concentrating harder, thinking more, or controlling thoughts. In reality, it often involves less effort, not more. Less mental debate, less second-guessing, less internal conflict. Clarity emerges when internal friction is removed. Just one of the clearest signs that you are not focused inward is the constant urge to explain yourself. When your actions are guided by external expectations, you feel compelled to justify every choice. You anticipate objections. You prepare defenses. This creates mental noise and drains energy. When you are focused inward, explanation becomes unnecessary. You may still communicate, but you no longer need to convince. Your decisions feel settled before they are spoken. That internal settlement is what others often mistake for confidence. Another marker of inward focus is selectivity. Outward-focused people try to respond to everything. Inward-focused people choose carefully what deserves their attention. This is not because they are indifferent, but because they understand that attention is a finite resource. Where it goes repeatedly, on identity forms. Focus inward means protecting your attention. It means recognizing that every comparison, every unnecessary reaction, every borrowed urgency pulls you away from your own signal. Over time, these small deviations accumulate. You drift, not because you chose to change direction, but because you never anchored yourself to begin with. Anchoring is the core of inward focus. An anchor doesn't stop movement, it gives movement direction. Without it, you may move quickly, but you will not know where you are going. With it, even slow movement becomes meaningful because it builds towards something stable. This is why people who focus inward often appear calm. They are not calm because they lack ambition. They are calm because they are not negotiating with themselves. Their energy is not split between conflicting priorities. They know what matters to them, and they let that knowledge guide their choices. Outward focus fragments. Inward focus integrates. Integration is what allows actions to compound. When your choices align with your values and long-term direction, repetition becomes sustainable. You are not constantly correcting course. You are refining, not restarting. This is especially important in areas like wealth, career, and creative work. These domains reward consistency far more than intensity. And consistency is impossible when your direction changes with every external signal. Focusing inward does not mean ignoring feedback. It means filtering it. Feedback is evaluated against your internal reference point, not absorbed automatically. You decide what to integrate and what to discard. This restores agency. And instead of being pulled by the environment, you move within it deliberately. Instead of reacting to pressure, you act from purpose. Over time, this creates a sense of ownership over your life that cannot be achieved through effort alone. Many people fear this shift because it requires letting go of constant stimulation. There is a quiet period when you stop reacting but haven't yet fully trusted your own signal. This space can feel uncomfortable at first, but it is in this space that clarity forms. Stillness precedes direction. When you stop filling every moment with response, your internal voice becomes audible again. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. And that steadiness becomes the foundation for everything that follows. Focusing inward is not a technique, it is a relationship with yourself. As that relationship strengthens, your actions become cleaner, your decisions feel lighter, and the results that emerge from this state no longer need to be forced. In the next chapter, we'll explore why people who operate from this inward focus often build wealth and stability faster. Not by moving more, but by leaking less energy along the way. Chapter 6. Why calm people compound faster. There is a common assumption that speed creates advantage. Move faster, act sooner, decide quicker, and you'll get ahead. In environments driven by urgency and competition, this belief feels intuitive. But when it comes to building anything that compounds, wealth, skill, influence, or stability, speed is rarely the decisive factor. Calm is. Calm does not mean passive. Calm does not mean slow. Calm means operating without internal resistance. Most people underestimate how much energy they lose to friction inside themselves. Second-guessing, overreacting, redeciding the same questions again and again. These invisible leaks don't feel dramatic, but over time they are devastating. They interrupt consistency, and consistency is the engine of compounding. So compounding only works when actions can be repeated cleanly. When someone is calm, their energy is not consumed by internal debate. They are not constantly negotiating with fear, urgency, or comparison. Their actions come from a settled place. Because of this, repeating the right behaviors does not feel like discipline. It feels natural. This is why calm people often appear to progress effortlessly. They are not doing extraordinary things. They are simply not exhausting themselves internally. Their attention stays where it matters. Their decisions are not constantly revised, and because their system is stable, small gains stack instead of resetting. Contrast this with a tense system. When tension drives action, everything feels urgent. Decisions are made quickly, but rarely with depth. Progress comes in bursts, followed by periods of fatigue or doubt. You may move fast, but you keep stopping to recover, reassess, or repair damage created by rushed choices. Speed without calm creates volatility. Volatility destroys compounding. Calm people avoid this trap because they value stability over stimulation. They are willing to move slower in the short term to preserve clarity in the long term. This patience is not moral, it is practical. They understand that anything worth building requires a stable environment to grow. Think of compounding like planting. Seeds do not respond to pressure. You cannot force growth by checking them constantly or pulling them out to see if they've changed. Growth happens in quiet, consistent conditions. Calm creates those conditions. Another advantage of calm is precision. When you are calm, you notice small deviations early. You adjust gently instead of dramatically. This keeps systems intact. Tense people, by contrast, often miss subtle signals because their attention is consumed by urgency. They only notice problems once they are large, and then they respond with force. Force creates disruption. Precision creates continuity. Calm also changes your relationship with time. Urgent people live in short horizons. They want confirmation now. Relief now. Proof now. Calm people think in longer arcs. They are less dependent on immediate feedback because they trust the process they are following. This trust allows them to stay consistent long enough for compounding to become visible. Most people quit right before compounding begins. Not because they lack ability, but because they cannot tolerate the quiet phase where progress is not yet obvious. Calm people endure this phase easily because they are not measuring their worth or safety by short-term results. This is a profound advantage. Calm reduces emotional decision-making. It keeps you from chasing what just worked for someone else. It prevents overexpansion during good periods and panic during difficult ones. Over time, this emotional stability produces financial stability, creative stability, and personal stability. Calm is risk management. Not the kind that avoids risk entirely, but the kind that prevents unnecessary exposure. Calm people do not all in impulsively. They do not overextend to prove something. They protect downside before chasing upside. This alone gives compounding room to work. There is also a social effect. Calm attracts trust. People feel safe around those who are not reactive. Opportunities tend to flow toward individuals who can hold complexity without becoming frantic. This is not charisma. It is reliable. Reliability compounds. When you are calm, others know what to expect from you. Expectations stabilize. Relationships deepen. Systems form around you naturally. None of this requires effortful networking or constant signaling. It emerges from consistency. Many people believe calm comes after success. In reality, success that lasts comes after calmness. Calm is not the reward, it is the prerequisite. This is why forcing calm never works. You cannot command yourself to relax while living in internal conflict. Calm emerges when focus is inward. Priorities are clear and actions are aligned. It is a byproduct of coherence, not a technique. Once calm becomes your baseline, compounding accelerates quietly. You make fewer decisions, but better ones. You take fewer actions, but each action carries more weight. You move with patience, and patience allows time to do its work. Time is the real multiplier. Those who remain calm long enough allow time to work on their behalf. Those who stay tense fight time instead of partnering with it. Over the years, the difference becomes dramatic. In the next chapter, we'll look at the moment when force gives way to flow, the point where results begin to change without effort, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped interfering. Chapter 7. The moment you stop forcing, things start moving. There is a moment that many people experience but rarely recognize for what it is. It doesn't announce itself with excitement or relief. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. In fact, it often feels almost ordinary. It is the moment you stop forcing, not because you gave up, not because you lowered your standards, but because something inside you finally settles. For a long time, effort felt necessary. You pushed because you believed momentum depended on constant pressure. You stayed alert because you thought vigilance was the price of progress. And then, gradually, something shifts. You realize that the effort you've been applying is no longer creating clarity. It's creating resistance. This is when forcing becomes visible. Forcing feels like tension before action, like urgency without direction, like trying to make outcomes comply. Most people ignore this feeling and double down. They assume discomfort means growth. But there is a different kind of discomfort, one that signals misalignment rather than challenge. Learning to tell the difference is critical. When you stop forcing, you don't stop acting. You stop interfering. Interference happens when your actions are driven by fear, comparison, or the need for control. It shows up as overthinking, micromanaging, and constant adjustment. You tweak systems that are already working. You chase confirmation instead of allowing results to unfold. Stopping interference creates space. In that space, something unexpected happens. Decisions begin to feel lighter. You no longer need to push yourself into motion because motion emerges naturally from clarity. Reactions still happen, but they are fewer and cleaner. You move when it makes sense, not because you feel behind. This is where many people become confused. They assume that ease means complacency, that if effort decreases, results must slow down. But the opposite is often true. When force is removed, energy stops being wasted internally. That energy becomes available for precision. Precision accelerates outcomes. Think of steering a vehicle. When the road is clear and the steering is aligned, small movements are enough. When the alignment is off, you must constantly correct, grip tightly, and stay tense just to stay on course. The movement feels intense, but progress is inefficient. Most people have been driving misaligned. When alignment returns, the ride smooths out. Speed becomes optional, not necessary. You arrive with less effort because the system is no longer fighting itself. This is the point where results start changing without force. Opportunities feel less chaotic. You notice patterns earlier. You say no more easily. You stop reacting to things that once pulled you off course, and because you're no longer scattered, the actions you do take carry more weight. This is not luck. It is an alignment expressing itself. Another sign you've stopped forcing is the disappearance of constant self-talk. You no longer need to convince yourself to keep going. You no longer need motivational reminders to stay disciplined. The work feels obvious. The direction feels settled. This internal quiet is often mistaken for stagnation by those who live in urgency. But it is the opposite. It is the calm before compounding becomes visible. Forcing tries to compress time. Alignment works with it. When you stop forcing, you stop demanding immediate proof. You allow time to participate in the process. This patience is not passive. It is grounded. It comes from trust in the system you're building rather than anxiety about outcomes. This trust changes behavior subtly but powerfully. You stop overextending during good periods. You stop panicking during slow ones. Your actions become more symmetrical, less reactive, more durable. This is where many people unknowingly cross a threshold. Before, their progress depended on constant effort. After, progress begins to feel self-sustaining. Systems start working without supervision. Relationships stabilize. Decisions reinforce one another instead of competing. This is the moment when results feel less fragile. You don't cling to them. You don't monitor them obsessively. You don't fear losing them the moment attention shifts. They rest on something deeper than effort. They rest on inner authority. Inner authority is the state where you trust your direction enough to let it unfold. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to defend it. You simply act from it. From the outside, this can look like confidence. From the inside, it feels like relief. The irony is that this state cannot be forced either. It emerges when you stop trying to control outcomes and start aligning inputs. When you focus inward, not to escape the world, but to anchor yourself within it. Once you experience this shift, you begin to recognize forcing immediately. It feels loud, unstable, unnecessary. and you become less willing to live that way again. This is not the end of the effort. It is the end of struggle. In the next chapter, we'll explore the small inner shifts that sustain this state, and how a subtle change in attention can quietly transform the entire game over time. Chapter 8. The small inner shift that changes the entire game. Most people assume that meaningful change requires dramatic action, a bold decision, a complete overhaul, a visible turning point. Because of this belief, they wait, they prepare, they search for the moment when everything finally feels ready. But the shifts that change everything rarely announce themselves that way. They are small, internal, almost easy to dismiss. The most powerful changes begin not with action, but with attention. Where your attention goes consistently, your life follows. For years, your attention may have been trained outward, toward outcomes, comparisons, reactions, and expectations. This wasn't a mistake. It was conditioning. You are taught to measure progress by external markers and to adjust yourself accordingly. Over time, this outward focus became automatic. The small inner shift begins when attention starts returning home. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough for you to notice when your energy is being pulled unnecessarily. At first, this awareness feels subtle. You catch yourself reacting before you respond. You notice the urge to check, compare, or adjust. And instead of immediately acting on it, you pause. Not to resist, just to observe. This pause is everything. In that pause, you reclaim choice. You're no longer moving purely on habit. You are present enough to decide whether something actually matters to you or whether it simply grabbed your attention. This is how alignment begins to sustain itself. Most people believe discipline is the key to consistency, but discipline is exhausting when it's used to fight yourself. Attention, on the other hand, gently redirects without force. When your attention shifts inward, behavior follows naturally. You begin to notice patterns. Which activities drain you quietly? Which decisions create tension? Which commitments feel heavy the moment you think about them? These signals were always there. You just didn't have the space to hear them. The inner shift is learning to trust these signals again. Not every urge needs to be acted on. Not every opportunity deserves your energy. Not every opinion requires a response. When you start filtering instead of absorbing, your life simplifies on its own. Simplicity is not minimalism, it is coherence. As noise decreases, your internal signal becomes clearer. You start recognizing what aligns and what doesn't without lengthy analysis. Decisions feel less dramatic because they are no longer battles between competing impulses. This is where many people make a mistake. They assume that because the change feels small, it can't possibly be enough. So they look for something bigger, louder, more convincing. But the power of this shift lies precisely in its subtlety. Small corrections compound. When attention is redirected inward, even slightly, your energy stops leaking. Over weeks and months, this creates a noticeable difference. You feel less pulled, less rushed, less reactive. And because you are no longer scattered, the actions you do take carry more momentum. Momentum is not speed. Momentum is direction sustained over time. Another effect of this shift is emotional neutrality. When you're no longer over-invested in every outcome, results lose their emotional charge. The wins don't inflate you. Setbacks don't destabilize you. This neutrality creates resilience. You stay in the game longer because you are not constantly riding emotional highs and lows. This is crucial for anything that compounds. Wealth, trust, skill, and reputation all require time. Emotional volatility shortens timelines artificially. People quit, pivot, or sabotage progress not because the path was wrong, but because they couldn't tolerate the emotional noise along the way. The inward shift quiets that noise. You begin to value alignment over validation, direction over speed, consistency over intensity. These values don't feel heroic, but they are incredibly effective. As this becomes your default state, the external world responds differently. People sense steadiness. Opportunities arrive without urgency. Conversations deepen. Systems stabilize. Not because you forced anything to happen, but because your presence is no longer reactive. This is how the entire game changes. You stop trying to win individual moments and start building something that doesn't need constant defense. You stop chasing confirmation and start trusting your own direction. You stop managing outcomes and start managing inputs. Inputs are where your power actually is. What you choose to focus on, what you choose to ignore, what you repeat calmly without drama. These choices shape results far more than bursts of effort ever could. The shift is small enough to overlook, but once it's made, it's impossible to unsee. You realize that clarity was never missing. It was just buried under noise. And as the noise continues to fall away, something else becomes clear. Results don't need to be hunted. They don't need to be forced. They organize themselves naturally around a focused, coherent inner state. In the final chapter, we'll bring all of this together and explore why inevitability is not something you chase, but something you enter when alignment becomes your way of being. Chapter 9. Why inevitability is a state, not a goal. Most people treat inevitability as something to reach, a finish line, a future condition where results finally feel secure and no longer fragile. They imagine that once they achieve enough, know enough, or prepare enough, certainty will arrive and stay. But inevitability does not work that way. Inevitability is not a reward you earn after struggle. It is a state you enter when struggle is no longer needed. This misunderstanding keeps people chasing forever. They believe that once the right result appears, their inner world will finally settle. In reality, the opposite is true. The inner state comes first. The results follow because they have no choice. Inevitability is not about control. It is about coherence sustained over time, where when your inner world is aligned, when attention is focused, priorities are clear, and actions are consistent, results stop feeling accidental. They may still take time, but they no longer feel uncertain. You sense their arrival before they appear, not because you are predicting specifics, but because the direction is stable. This is the difference between hoping and knowing. Hope depends on circumstances. Knowing depends on state. Most people live in a constant cycle of hope and disappointment because their state keeps changing. One week they feel focused, the next week scattered. One month they are calm, the next month reactive. With each shift, inevitability resets. They are always starting over. Inevitability requires continuity. Continuity does not come from repeating actions perfectly. It comes from remaining internally consistent. When your inner reference point stays steady, even imperfect actions accumulate in the same direction. Mistakes don't derail you. Delays don't destabilize you. Progress continues quietly beneath the surface. This is why people who understand inevitability rarely look rushed. They are not racing outcomes, they are maintaining state. Maintaining state means protecting attention, honoring boundaries, and allowing time to work without interference. It means not reacting emotionally to every fluctuation. It means trusting that consistency, applied calmly, produces outcomes that cannot be rushed, but also cannot be stopped. Once you experience this, your relationship with effort changes. You still work, you still build, you still care, but you no longer try to force the future into existence. You stop asking, "Is this working yet?" and start asking, "Is this aligned?" That single shift removes enormous pressure. Pressure creates urgency. Alignment creates inevitability. This is why inevitability feels quiet. It does not announce itself with excitement. It feels like a deep sense of direction that doesn't require constant reinforcement. You know what you are doing and why you are doing it. You don't need immediate proof because your inner state is not dependent on external validation. This independence is powerful. When you stop measuring yourself by short-term results, you stay in the game longer. When you stay in the game longer, compounding becomes unavoidable. And when compounding takes over, effort becomes less relevant than patience. This is the paradox most people miss. They try to achieve inevitability through intensity, yet when inevitability emerges through calm repetition. They try to secure the future through control, when the future responds better to coherence. The moment you understand this, your priorities shift. You care less about doing more. You care more about doing what aligns. You care less about speed. You care more about sustainability. These are not moral choices. They are structural ones. Inevitability is a structural outcome of a stable system. A system does not need motivation. It needs balance. When the components support one another, the system runs. When they don't, no amount of effort can keep it from breaking down. Your inner world is a system. When your attention, values, and actions reinforce each other, results organize naturally. When they conflict, you feel friction, urgency, and instability. Yet the external world mirrors this perfectly. This is why inevitability cannot be chased. Chasing creates misalignment. Alignment creates inevitability. The final realization is this: nothing external needs to change for inevitability to begin. The shift is internal, and it is available now. Not through dramatic action, but through consistent inward focus. When you focus inward, you stop fragmenting your energy. When energy stops fragmenting, actions gain weight. When actions gain weight, time amplifies them. And when time amplifies aligned action, results arrive as a matter of course. Not suddenly, not explosively, but steadily, predictably, and with a sense of calm certainty that does not depend on circumstances. This is what it means when results become inevitable. They are no longer something you wait for, they are something you live toward, and once you enter this state, there is no urgency to leave it. At the beginning of this audiobook, we questioned a belief that most people never stop to examine. The idea that better results come from pushing harder, reacting faster, and staying constantly alert. That belief is deeply ingrained. It feels productive, it feels responsible. But as you've seen, it quietly creates tension, instability, and a life that requires constant effort just to maintain. What you've explored here is a different way of operating. Not a shortcut, not a mindset trick, but a shift in where everything begins. When focus remains outward, life becomes reactive. You move when something moves first. You decide when something demands an answer. Over time, this fragments energy and erodes clarity. Results may appear, but they feel fragile, temporary, and dependent on constant supervision. When focus turns inward, something fundamental changes. Decisions originate from clarity instead of pressure. Actions come from coherence instead of urgency. You stop forcing progress and start allowing alignment to do its work. This is not withdrawal from the world. It is a more grounded way of participating in it. Throughout these chapters, one principle has quietly repeated itself. Sustainable results are not created by intensity, but by consistency, rooted in inner stability. Calm people compound faster not because they care less, but because they leak less energy. They protect attention. They filter noise. They stay with directions long enough for time to amplify their efforts. This is where inevitability is born. Inevitability is not a future outcome you chase. It is a present state you maintain. When your inner world is coherent, results stop feeling uncertain. You may not know exactly how or when things will unfold, but you sense their direction. That sense of direction removes urgency, and without urgency, your actions become cleaner, more deliberate, and far more effective. Perhaps the most important realization is this: nothing external needs to change for this shift to begin. You do not need more information, better timing, or greater intensity. You need less noise, less reaction, less interference with your own clarity. When you stop forcing, things start moving. When you stop chasing, results organize themselves. This does not mean challenges disappear. It means challenges no longer destabilize you. They become part of a larger, steadier process. Progress continues quietly, even when it's not immediately visible. But if there is one thing to carry with you from this audiobook, let it be this: focus inward is not a one-time decision. It is a practice of returning to your internal reference point again and again. Each time you do, you reinforce alignment. Each time you reinforce alignment, you strengthen the conditions that make results unavoidable. Over time, this becomes your way of being. You move with less friction. You choose with more confidence. You build with patience. And gradually, without fanfare or force, life begins to respond. Not because you demanded it, but because, in a coherent system, it has no other choice. When you focus inward, results don't need to be chased. They become inevitable.